The Zoom call connected at 9:43 in the morning. Trevor Ashford's face filled my screen, his corner office framed behind him. Floor-to-ceiling windows over downtown Seattle. Abstract art that probably cost more than I made in a year. Every detail staged for effect. He wasn't alone. Claudia Winters from legal sat on his left. Hammond Price, the CFO, sat on his right. Three faces staring back at me through my laptop camera while I sat in my cramped home office, surrounded by stacks of merger documents and tax code printouts. That's when I knew. This wasn't a meeting to discuss my findings. This was an execution. "Morgan, we've reviewed your audit report," Trevor said. In that particular tone successful men develop after years of never being told no. "And frankly, we're concerned about your grasp of complex tax structures." I just handed them documentation of a $150 million tax liability buried inside their upcoming merger. A merger set to close in 48 hours, right before their IPO. An IPO that would make Trevor and his executives extraordinarily rich, while the bomb I'd found quietly ticked toward the moment it would take the whole company down. Before I go further, if this story's grabbing you, your support genuinely helps as we work toward our next goal of 2,000 subscribers. We just hit our first milestone together, and every subscription helps bring more of these stories to life. The button's there whenever you're ready. My name is Morgan Hale. Until that Thursday morning, I was the senior tax auditor at Whitmore & Associates, a mid-tier firm that specialized in merger and acquisition due diligence. I didn't come from money. My grandmother cleaned houses. My grandfather worked construction. Together they scraped together enough to send my mother through community college, where she became a bookkeeper at a small manufacturing plant. She taught me that numbers tell stories, stories about honesty, about the gap between what people claim and what they actually do. I got into accounting because I was good with numbers. I got into auditing because I was good at spotting what people wanted buried. Not some innate gift, but something I learned watching my mother catch payroll discrepancies, fix errors that would have shorted workers their overtime, correct mistakes that could have cost families their holiday bonus. She taught me that getting the numbers right wasn't just about compliance. It was about protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. So when I found the tax hole buried in the Ashford Meridian merger, yes, the target was actually called Meridian Solutions, though that's the only place that name shows up in this story. I wasn't chasing glory or trying to make trouble. I was doing my job. The same job I'd done cleanly for 7 years across 43 merger audits. Trevor leaned into the camera. "Hammonds explained that your interpretation of the tax treatment is overly conservative. This structure is industry standard for an asset acquisition like this." "It's not," I said quietly. "The asset transfer triggers recognition under Section 367, and the IP valuation you're using to offset the liability isn't backed by any independent assessment. The IRS will." "The IRS," Trevor cut in, "will see whatever our tax attorneys present to them, which is why we've decided to bring in a more experienced firm to finish the audit." "Hammond, what's the name?" "Fitzgerald and Chun," Hammond said, not even looking at the screen. "They've handled several billion-dollar mergers. They understand sophisticated tax planning." The implication landed clean. I didn't understand. I was out of my depth. I was a problem they'd solve by hiring people who'd hand them the answer they wanted. "This isn't about sophistication," I said, keeping my voice level despite the anger building underneath it. "This is a clear violation of..." "Morgan." Trevor's smile went thin. "I'm going to be direct. You're a C-list accountant at a C-list firm, trying to make a name for yourself by inventing problems that don't exist. This merger's already been reviewed by 3 law firms and 2 Big Four consultants. Are you seriously telling me you caught something all of them missed?" "Yes." The word just sat there in the space between us. Claudia shifted in her seat. Hammond stared at something off camera. Trevor's smile disappeared entirely. "Then you're either incompetent or deliberately trying to sabotage this deal. Either way, Whitmore & Associates' engagement is terminated, effective immediately. And Morgan, I'll be honest, I'm going to have a conversation with your managing partner about your judgment. I suspect this may be your last audit." The screen went black. They'd ended the call. 9:49 a.m. 6 minutes total. And I'd just been fired from the biggest engagement of my career by a CEO who'd called me C-list on camera and threatened my future in the industry. I sat there staring at my own reflection in the dark screen. Behind me, visible in the glass, sat the boxes of documents I'd spent 3 weeks combing through. Tax returns, asset valuations, corporate structure diagrams, international transfer pricing agreements. Thousands of pages telling one very clear story. Trevor Ashford was using an illegal tax structure to hide a massive liability, racing to go public before anyone noticed, betting that by the time the IRS caught on, he'd already be a billionaire. My phone rang. Nathan Whitmore, my managing partner, picked up. Morgan, I just got off the phone with Trevor Ashford. He's furious. He's threatening to withhold payment for our entire engagement, and he says he'll make sure every tech company in Seattle knows we're not cooperative with innovative tax strategies. Nathan, the tax structure is illegal. I documented. You documented your opinion. An opinion that contradicts multiple other professional assessments. Morgan, I respect your thoroughness. But there's thorough and then there's obstinate. Ashford is a major player in this market. We can't afford to. We can't afford to sign off on fraud. Silence. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious violation. Section 367 requires. I know what it requires. I also know tax law has gray areas, and different professionals can land in different places. Ashford is moving forward with Fitzgerald and Chan. They'll do their own review. Our engagement is done. I need you to box up the documents and return them to the client. And if Fitzgerald and Chan sign off, and the IRS comes knocking after the IPO, that's their problem to deal with. Not ours. Except it was mine. Because I'd seen it. I documented it. And if I quietly boxed everything up and moved on to my next audit while sitting on knowledge of a $150 million hidden liability, what did that make me? My mother used to say the numbers don't care about your career. What she meant was that integrity isn't negotiable, that if the math shows someone's being cheated, you say something even when it costs you. I knew this was going to cost me the moment I decided to act. Nathan, I need to do what's right here. Another pause. Morgan, don't do anything rash. You're a good auditor. You have a future at this firm. But if you make this personal, if you go around leveling accusations at a client, I can't protect you. I understand. I hung up. 10:15 a.m. I pulled up the email I drafted the night before, written after my third pass through the tax structure. Once it became obvious this wasn't a gray area or an aggressive read, it was fraud. Deliberate, engineered fraud, built to deceive both the IRS and the future shareholders who'd eventually buy into the IPO. I'd addressed it to the IRS Examination Division, specifically the Large Business and International Unit that handles complex corporate tax matters. It laid out the tax structure in detail, cited the specific violations, and included copies of the documents proving the liability existed and had been deliberately hidden. It also included my full name, credentials, and contact information. This wasn't an anonymous tip. This was me, Morgan Hale, CPA, putting my professional reputation on the line to report fraud. My hand hovered over send. This would end my career at Whitmore. It would probably make me unhireable at any firm doing business in Seattle's tech sector. Trevor Ashford was wealthy, connected, and vindictive. He'd see to it that everyone knew I was the auditor who blew up a billion-dollar deal. But if I didn't send it, I'd spend the rest of my life knowing I'd stayed quiet while people got hurt, because that liability wasn't going away. Eventually the IRS would find it anyway, and when they did, the company would collapse. Shareholders would lose everything. And the employees, the engineers, the support staff, the regular people who'd taken stock options instead of bigger salaries, would be the ones who paid for Trevor's greed. I clicked send. 10:23 a.m. Then I started making copies of everything, my work papers, my analysis, my calculations, saved across 3 separate drives because I knew what was coming. Nathan would demand I delete everything. Trevor's lawyers would claim I'd stolen confidential material. I needed to protect myself. The IRS responded faster than I expected. 11:07. An email from Senior Revenue Agent Kimberly Larson. Mr. Hale, we've received your referral regarding Ashford Technologies and the pending merger. The details you've provided warrant immediate investigation. We're issuing a formal inquiry to the company within the hour. Please be available for a call this afternoon to discuss your findings in detail. Also be advised, as the reporting party in a potential fraud investigation, You may be entitled to whistleblower protections and awards under IRS guidelines. Whistleblower awards? I hadn't even considered that. The IRS pays a percentage of recovered taxes to people who report significant fraud, and on a $150 million case that could be substantial. Not that it mattered, I hadn't done this for money. I'd done it because my mother's voice in my head wouldn't let me do anything else. But that timeline within the hour, that was the part that mattered. Trevor's IPO was set to launch the next morning. The merger was supposed to close that night. If the IRS sent an inquiry letter today, everything would freeze in place. 11:48. My phone exploded, not literally, but it felt close. Calls from Nathan, from other partners at Whitmore, from numbers I didn't recognize. Voicemails and texts, all some version of the same question. What did you do? Then an email arrived from Trevor Ashford himself, CC'd to what looked like his entire legal team. Morgan Hale has engaged in a malicious and defamatory campaign to sabotage Ashford Technologies through false reports to regulatory agencies. We are pursuing all available legal remedies, including claims for tortious interference, defamation, and theft of confidential information. Mr. Hale will be held personally liable for all damages resulting from his reckless actions. I read it twice. The threat was unmistakable. Trevor intended to destroy me. Lawsuits, professional complaints, personal liability. Using his resources to bury me in legal fees until I had nothing left. My grandmother used to say bullies count on you being too scared to fight back. That they throw big threats because they're terrified of what happens if you don't flinch. I didn't flinch. Instead, I called Angela Morrison, a former IRS attorney who'd gone into private practice defending whistleblowers. I'd looked her up the moment I found the tax hole just in case. Angela, it's Morgan Hale. We spoke last week about a potential case. The Ashford situation. I saw the news. The IPO just got suspended. What? I pulled up my browser and searched Ashford Technologies IPO. The headline hit like cold water. Ashford Technologies IPO halted, pending IRS investigation. The article was short. The SEC had suspended the launch pending resolution of material tax compliance questions raised by the IRS. The merger with the target company was in jeopardy. Pre-IPO share trading had been frozen. Trevor Ashford had declined to comment. 12:11. Less than 3 hours since Trevor called me a C-list accountant and fired me on Zoom, and I just collapsed the entire plan. Morgan, you still there? Angela's voice pulled me back. Yeah, I didn't think it would happen this fast. The IRS doesn't play around with 9-figure tax fraud, especially when someone hands them a fully documented case right before a company tries to go public. They probably already have a team combing through the merger documents. And Morgan Trevor Ashford's threat email? That's evidence of retaliation against a whistleblower. It actually strengthens your case. My case. For whistleblower protection and compensation. If the IRS recovers taxes based on your report, you're entitled to 15 to 30% of the collected proceeds. On a $150 million case, once you factor in penalties and interest, total recovery could top $200 million. Your share could land somewhere between $30 and $60 million. $60 million. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment and drove a car with 170,000 miles on it. My biggest financial goal to date had been scraping together a condo down payment. Now I was potentially staring at a whistleblower award that would change my entire life. But that wasn't what was running through my head. I kept seeing Trevor's face on that call. The smug certainty that he could dismiss me, threaten my career, and keep moving forward with the fraud because people like me didn't fight back. Angela. What happens to Ashford Technologies? Honestly, the company might survive if they unwind the structure, pay the liability, and restructure the merger. But the IPO is dead. No underwriter touches them until this is resolved, and resolution could take months, maybe years. Trevor and his executives won't see their payout. They could face personal liability if the IRS finds the structure was deliberately fraudulent, and the company's reputation is trashed. And the employees? They're the ones who'll take the worst of it. Stock options that were supposed to make them wealthy are worthless now. Some will leave. The company will probably need layoffs to cover the liability. That was the part that hurt. The engineers, designers, and project managers who'd worked 60-hour weeks building something real, trusting they'd be rewarded when the company went public. They hadn't done anything wrong, and they'd pay for it anyway. Is there a way to protect them? I asked. Not really. Corporate fraud always lands hardest on the people who didn't cause it. The executives have other assets, other income streams. The employees just have their jobs and they're now worthless options. I thought about my mother catching payroll errors, making sure workers got what they were owed. She couldn't fix the whole system, but she could protect the people right in front of her. Angela, the whistleblower award. If I get it, can I use it however I want? It's your money. Why? Just thinking about options. The rest of the afternoon blurred. The IRS wanted a detailed interview which took 3 hours, walking Agent Larson through every piece of the tax structure. Nathan Whitmore called to tell me I was officially fired from Whitmore and Associates, effective immediately, for gross violation of client confidentiality and professional standards. I'd already expected that. What I hadn't expected was the call that came after. Morgan Hale. Yes. This is Bethany Cross from the Wall Street Financial Review. I'm writing a story on the Ashford Technologies IPO collapse. I understand you're the auditor who reported the tax issues to the IRS. Someone had leaked my name. Probably someone at the IRS, or maybe someone at Ashford trying to paint a target on my back. I can't comment on an ongoing investigation. I understand, but I wanted your response to Trevor Ashford's statement. What statement? He held a press conference half an hour ago. He said a disgruntled junior auditor fabricated tax issues to sabotage the company after being pulled from the engagement for incompetence. He says you're facing legal action and professional sanctions. He's framing this as a personal vendetta, not a legitimate compliance issue. C-list accountant. Incompetent. Disgruntled. Fabricated. Trevor was working to destroy my credibility before the facts even landed. Ms. Cross, I'm a licensed CPA with 7 years of audit experience and a clean professional record. I reported documented tax violations to the appropriate regulatory authority after the client rejected my findings. Everything in my report is supported by the company's own documents. Trevor Ashford can say whatever he wants, but the IRS has the evidence, and they'll reach their own conclusion. Can you share any of that evidence? Not while the investigation is active. But I stand behind every word of my report. The article ran 2 hours later. Bethany had done real digging. She'd found 3 other auditors who'd worked on Ashford deals and were willing to say anonymously that Trevor had a pattern of pressuring professionals into signing off on aggressive tax strategies. She'd surfaced evidence of 2 earlier IRS inquiries into Ashford subsidiaries, both quietly settled. She quoted me accurately, framing the story as a whistleblower case rather than the personal vendetta Trevor was pushing. The reaction was immediate. Social media erupted with arguments about corporate tax fraud, whistleblower protection, and auditor ethics. Some people called me a hero. Others called me a snitch who torched a company and cost people their jobs. Trevor's supporters were loud and relentless, flooding my LinkedIn with messages calling me jealous, incompetent, a failed accountant trying to tear down someone successful. I stopped reading after the first dozen. My grandmother's voice again. Don't wrestle with pigs, you both get dirty and the pig enjoys it. I turned my attention back to the investigation instead. Over the next 3 weeks I handed over documents, gave testimony, provided analysis. From the outside, I watched Ashford Technologies scramble to save itself. New tax advisors came in and confirmed exactly what I'd reported. They tried restructuring the merger to strip out the liability, but the target company walked. They went hunting for alternative IPO underwriters. Nobody would touch them. Then the resignations started. Hammond Price, the CFO who'd sat silently on that Zoom call while Trevor called me C-list, resigned to pursue other opportunities. Claudia Winters, the general counsel, followed a week after. Trevor held on, insisting he'd done nothing wrong, calling the whole thing a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an incompetent auditor, until the IRS issued its formal findings. The tax structure was fraudulent. The liability was real and had been deliberately hidden. Ashford Technologies owed $153 million in back taxes, plus $78 million in penalties and interest. Total, $231 million. The company didn't have it. They'd burned through their cash reserves on the merger and IPO prep. Their only remaining options were a fire sale to a bigger competitor or bankruptcy. They chose the sale. A Silicon Valley giant scooped them up for a fraction of their earlier valuation, mostly for the technology and the talent. Trevor was pushed out as part of the deal, his equity stake gutted to almost nothing. The executives who'd backed the fraudulent structure were blacklisted. And the employees, the ones I'd worried about most, lost their stock options but kept their jobs under the new ownership. The case took 4 months for the IRS to close out. I spent those months living on savings and freelance bookkeeping work. No accounting firm would touch me. The word going around was that I was toxic, too risky, too willing to run to regulators, not a team player. Trevor's version of events had traveled faster than the truth. There were plenty of nights I lay awake wondering if I'd made the right call, if protecting my integrity was worth professional exile, if there'd been some other path that wouldn't have blown everything up. But every time I went down that road, I'd land back on Trevor's face on that Zoom screen, that absolute certainty he could commit fraud and never face a consequence, because people like me didn't matter. And I'd hear my mother again. The numbers don't care about your career. The IRS Whistleblower Award came through on a Tuesday morning. Angela called at 7 a.m. Morgan, the determination letter just came in. The IRS collected $231 million from Ashford Technologies. Your award is set at 24% of the collected proceeds. That's $55.4 million. $55,400,000. For doing the job I was already supposed to be doing. For refusing to stay silent once I'd seen fraud. There'll be taxes, obviously, Angela continued. And my fee is contingent, 20% of the award. But net, you're looking at roughly $33 million. $33 million. Generational wealth. Enough that I'd never need to work again. Never worry about money again. Never care that I've been blacklisted from the accounting industry. Morgan? Still there. Yeah. Just processing. There's one more thing. The IRS is putting out a public statement about the case, using it as an example of successful whistleblower cooperation. Your name's going to be public. There's no avoiding that. Will that help or hurt? Both. The accounting industry might keep seeing you as a troublemaker, but companies looking for compliance officers, forensic accountants, expert witnesses, they'll see someone with integrity who can't be intimidated. You'll have options. Different ones than before. Different options. But options. The public statement dropped that afternoon. The IRS praised the vigilance and professional courage of the reporting individual, noting that whistleblowers were essential to tax enforcement. They didn't name me in the official release, but 3 news outlets had my name within the hour. The response was overwhelming. My phone rang nonstop with reporters, recruiters, people requesting interviews or dangling job offers, or wanting to share their own stories of fraud they'd witnessed and stayed quiet about. But the call that actually mattered came 2 days later. Morgan Hale. Yes. My name is Francine Elliott. I'm founder and CEO of Elliott Industries, a manufacturing company out of Tacoma. We're heading into a major expansion, and we need a chief compliance officer, someone who understands tax law, can't be pressured, and actually cares about doing things right. Your name kept coming up. Would you be open to talking? A real job, not freelance consulting or scattered bookkeeping. A role with authority and real resources behind it. What kind of manufacturing? Automotive parts. We supply components to 3 major manufacturers. Roughly $800 million in annual revenue. Family-owned, 40 years in business, and we've never had a tax problem because we're boring and honest. But we're expanding internationally now, and international tax law is a mess. We need someone who can navigate it without cutting corners. Boring and honest. That sounded exactly right. I met Francine the following week at Elliott Industries headquarters, a no-frills building in an industrial park that smelled like machine oil and coffee. No floor-to-ceiling windows. No abstract art. Just a working office where people built real things. Francine was in her late 50s, dressed practically, no jewelry aside from a watch that looked like it had survived a few decades. We sat across a conference table under a whiteboard covered in production schedules. I read everything about the Ashford situation, she said, no preamble. Trevor Ashford's still out there claiming you sabotaged him out of spite. Half the accounting world thinks you're a whistleblower hero. Half thinks you violated client confidentiality. So I need to know, did you do the right thing? Yes. Even though it cost you your career? It cost me one career. Apparently I'm starting a different one. Francine smiled. My father built this company on a loan and a handshake. He taught me reputation takes decades to build and seconds to destroy. We've lasted 40 years because we deliver quality parts on time. And we don't cheat on taxes or customers. I need a compliance officer who shares that. Someone who'll tell me when we're about to do something stupid, even when I don't want to hear it. That's exactly what I told Trevor Ashford. It didn't go well for me. Trevor Ashford is currently being sued by his own shareholders and investigated by the SEC. You're sitting here with a $55 million IRS award and multiple job offers. I'd say it went very well, just not the way he planned. She offered me the position, Chief Compliance Officer, competitive salary, equity in the company, and critically, direct reporting to her with the authority to shut down anything that violated regulations. I accepted. Over the next 2 years I built Elliott Industries' compliance program from the ground up. International tax structures that were boring and fully legal. Transfer pricing that followed every guideline. Documentation built to survive any audit. When Francine's son wanted to set up an offshore subsidiary to trim tax liability, I laid out exactly why that was a bad idea, and she backed me. No drama. No Zoom calls ending in termination.
No IRS investigations.
Just competent, ethical work that let the company grow without cutting a single corner. The whistleblower money, $33 million net after taxes and legal fees, mostly sat untouched. I bought a modest house, gave to organizations supporting whistleblowers, and set up a fund for accounting students from working-class backgrounds, trying to help people who reminded me of where I'd started. But I also did something that felt necessary. I reached out to Ashford Technologies' HR department, now part of the acquiring company, and asked for a list of employees who'd lost stock options in the collapse. 327 people who'd been promised equity that ended up worthless. I set up a trust fund with $5 million from the award, and each of those 327 employees received a payment based on their original option grant. Not enough to replace what they'd lost, but enough to acknowledge they'd been caught in something they hadn't created. Most never learned who funded it. The trust was anonymous. But a few figured it out and I started getting emails. I don't know if you're the one behind this, but if you are, thank you. I was about to lose my house when the options went worthless. This payment covered 6 months of mortgage while I figured things out. My daughter's college fund was tied to those stock options. Your gift meant she could stay enrolled. I worked at Ashford for 7 years and believed in what we were building. When it collapsed, I felt like I'd wasted my career. Knowing someone cared enough to help us, it restored something. Thank you. Those emails mattered more than the award money, more than the job at Elliott Industries, more than the eventual vindication when Trevor Ashford settled the shareholder lawsuits and quietly vanished from the business world. Because reporting Trevor's fraud was never about revenge or money, or even abstract ethics. It came down to the same thing my mother taught me while checking payroll for errors, that numbers represent people, and getting them right means protecting people who can't protect themselves. Trevor had built his empire on a fraud that would eventually have wrecked hundreds of lives. Employees who'd lose their jobs, shareholders who'd lose their investments, competitors undercut by illegally reduced tax costs. And he'd counted on people like me staying quiet, putting our careers ahead of doing the right thing. He made 2 mistakes. First, he underestimated a C-list accountant from a C-list firm. Second, he never learned what my grandmother taught me about bullies: they count on you being too scared to fight back. A year after the IRS award, I got an email from Bethany Cross, the reporter who'd written that first piece. She was working on a follow-up about the Ashford collapse and its aftermath. Would I be willing to talk on the record this time? The safe move was to decline. Let the story fade, focus on my new career and my new life. But silence is how bad actors win. Silence is how fraud gets normalized and whistleblowers turn into cautionary tales instead of examples worth following. I said yes. Bethany came to Elliott Industries headquarters. We sat in the same conference room where Francine had hired me, and I told her everything: finding the fraud, the Zoom call where Trevor fired me, the decision to report it to the IRS, for months of professional exile, the eventual vindication. Do you regret it? Bethany asked. You could have stayed quiet, kept your job at Whitmore, moved on to the next audit. Would that have been easier? Easier isn't the same as better. But you suffered. Fired, blacklisted, threatened with lawsuits. Was the principal worth the personal cost? I thought back to that Zoom call, Trevor's face so sure of his own power, the casual cruelty in calling me C-list, in threatening my career, in assuming I simply didn't matter. The cost was never optional, I said. The moment I saw that fraud, I had a choice: be complicit or report it. There was no middle path where I kept both my career and my integrity. So the real question was never whether the principal was worth the cost. It was whether I could live with myself if I chose silence. And now, with the award, the new job, the vindication, do you feel like you won? I feel like I did what my mother taught me. Get the numbers right even when it's hard. The fact that it worked out doesn't make it a win. It just makes it survivable. The article ran the following month. Fair, balanced, thorough. Bethany talked to former Ashford employees who'd received payments from the anonymous trust, some of them guessing correctly where the money had come from. She spoke with tax attorneys who called the case a textbook example of fraud that should never have gotten as far as it did. And she talked to Trevor Ashford, who still maintained he'd done nothing wrong, and that I'd destroyed a company purely out of personal spite. The court of public opinion was never going to reach a unanimous verdict. Some people would always see me as a hero. Others would always see me as a troublemaker who'd cost people their jobs. That was fine. I hadn't done any of this for public opinion. I'd done it because my grandmother cleaned houses, and my grandfather worked construction, and my mother caught payroll errors, and all three of them had taught me the same lesson. Integrity isn't optional, even when it's expensive. 3 years after that Zoom call, Elliott Industries finished its international expansion. We operated across 7 countries, each with its own complex tax structure, and every one of them was legal, documented, and built to survive any audit. Not because we were afraid, but because that's how you build something meant to last. Francine called me into her office on a Friday afternoon. Morgan, I wanted to tell you before the announcement goes out. I'm retiring next year. My son's taking over as CEO, and we'd like you to join the board. A board seat, real authority, a real voice in shaping how the company operated. On one condition, I said. Francine raised an eyebrow. You're negotiating? The compliance officer role reports directly to the board, not to the CEO. Non-negotiable independence. If your son wants to get aggressive with taxes or regulations, the compliance officer needs to be able to shut it down without fear of getting fired. You're building a system to protect whoever comes after you. I'm building a system that protects the company and the people who work here. I won't always be the one in the role, but whoever is needs the power to actually do the job. Francine smiled. Done. Welcome to the board. That evening I drove home past the industrial parks and no-frills buildings that make up Tacoma's manufacturing district. No floor-to-ceiling windows, no abstract art. Just places where people built real things and went home to real families. My phone buzzed with an email. Another accounting student asking about the whistleblower case, wondering if they should report something they'd found during their internship. I get these regularly now. I pulled over and called them. 18 years old, interning at a regional accounting firm, had stumbled onto what looked like expense report fraud committed by a partner. Scared to report it. Scared not to. What would you do? They asked. Document everything. Report it through the proper channels, your supervisor first, then the firm's ethics hotline if that goes nowhere. Understand that doing the right thing might cost you the internship. But understand that staying silent will cost you something too. It'll cost you the ability to look at yourself and know you had integrity when it counted. But what if I'm wrong? What if it's not really fraud? Just something I don't understand yet? Then you'll learn something. But if you're right and you stay quiet, people get hurt. That's the weight you'll be carrying. Only you can decide if your career is worth that weight. They thanked me and hung up. Maybe they'd report it. Maybe they wouldn't. That was theirs to decide, their life, their integrity to build or trade away. But I told them what I wish someone had told me before that Zoom call with Trevor Ashford. Doing the right thing usually costs you in the short term, but staying silent costs you forever. I drove home to my modest house, in a neighborhood where people mow their own lawns and fix their own cars. The whistleblower millions sit in accounts doing boring, sensible things: index funds, municipal bonds, college scholarships for kids from families like mine. No judged. No pentose. No status symbols to prove I'd won because winning was never really the point. The point was building a life I could be proud of, funded by money I'd earned by refusing to be complicit in fraud. Trevor Ashford called me a C-list accountant. He thought it was an insult, a way to shrink me, to wave off my findings. But he was right in a way he never understood. I was C-list. I was never going to make partner at some prestigious firm, or build a luxury lifestyle, or land in a business magazine profile. I was going to do competent, ethical work. I was going to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. I was going to sleep at night knowing that when I found $150 million in tax fraud, I reported it, even though it cost me everything I'd built. And 3 years later, I'd built something better. Before we wrap up, if this story landed with you and you haven't subscribed yet, your support genuinely matters as we push toward 2,000 subscribers. Every subscription helps bring more of these stories to you. The button's there whenever you're ready. My name is Morgan Hale. And this is how I learned that the most important audit you'll ever run isn't of a company's books. It's of your own integrity, the moment you're forced to choose between what's easy and what's right. The CEO laughed at my $150 million audit finding. He called me C-list and fired me over Zoom. By lunch, his IPO had collapsed. But that's not the victory. The victory was knowing that 327 employees got help when their stock options turned worthless. That a company learned to value compliance over clever tax schemes. That somewhere out there, an 18-year-old accounting intern might report fraud because they read about someone who did it and came out the other side. Trevor Ashford thought power meant never facing consequences. He learned the C-list accountant had power too, the power to tell the truth, and let the consequences land wherever they landed. Sometimes the truth is expensive, but silence always costs more.